We're excited to announce that our very own podcasting platform, Zencastr, has become a new sponsor to the show. Check out the podcast's discount link in our show notes and stay tuned for why we love using Zen for the podcast.
You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome to the ArchaeoTech Podcast, episode 116. I'm your host, Chris Webster, with my co-host, Paul Zimmerman. Today, we'll take a look at the tools that we use once the fieldwork is done. Let's get to it. All right, Paul, welcome to the show. How's it going, man?
It's going okay. Today was a really awful day with network problems that we chased and never came to a real conclusion. But now everybody's gone home and we'll attack it again tomorrow. Aside from that, though, all fine. How are you doing?
Nice. Not too bad. Not too bad. I think this is the first time you and I have recorded in about a month because I've just had some real tough scheduling challenges. So I put up that quick episode last week. That was, to be honest, I don't even remember now what it was about, but I'm sure it was fantastic. But it was just a solo show because I have a vow to myself not to miss an episode if at all costs, put something up, but I'm not going to put up garbage, but I want to put something up and I don't run reruns. So hopefully everybody enjoyed that. Along those lines, let's take a look at the tools that we use after fieldwork is done, because I have a lot of systems and processes in place that really keep my head on straight. For example, I missed a meeting on early Saturday morning. I do a podcast workshop once a month. That's like 9 hours long for people who want to learn how to podcast. And I had a meeting with our co-founder here, Tristan, at 6:30 a.m. on Saturday morning, 6:30 local time, because he's 7 hours ahead of me. And I'll tell you what, we were just having the conversation about that on Slack, and I didn't put it on my calendar. And at like 6:45, 7 o'clock, he's like, "Hey, I'm ready." I was like, "Ah, crap," because I did not remember it. If it's not on my calendar, not in one of my systems that I use, or one of the tools that I use to keep things straight, it simply just doesn't happen. The other tool I use is Trello. Yeah, so. But let's. You brought this up for a very specific reason, and we've got a bunch of notes here. So I'm going to throw it to you, so we make sure we get your rants out of the way.
So my rants. I've got some opinions, and everybody needs to listen to them now.
Nice.
We focus. It struck me. We focus a lot on the tech that people use in the field, right? We talk a lot about things like LiDAR and drones, and I always want to talk about total stations, and we talk about GIS and on down the line. Well, GIS is often used outside of the field too, but one big class of tools that we've mentioned a number of times, but we've never really done any kind of deep dive into, is word processors. And it's a little funny to me because it's something that we all use and we all, I'm sure, have opinions about them, but it's really top of my mind lately. And so the reason is we're recording this on November 5th, and I believe the release date is a week and a half from now, November 14th, which is perfect because that's the day after we're going to have combinations birthday party and Festschrift reveal party for my dissertation advisor. So for the last few years, I've mentioned it kind of obliquely on the podcast, but I've never been able to say outright what this project was because it was a secret. I've been working with Katie Blanchard, who's the keeper of the Ancient Near East section at the University of Pennsylvania Museum, and my wife, Jelena Rakic, who's a curator of the Department of Ancient Near Eastern Art at the Met here. We've been three of us co-editing a volume, a collection of papers, in honor of Richard Zettler, my advisor. Mm-hmm. But of course, it was secret, so we couldn't talk about it. But I've been, doing a lot of work off, not nearly as much as they have, but a lot of work aside from podcasts and my regular day job and my night job and everything else has been editing this volume for the last 2.5 years now. And we've been doing it all with Word, with documents that are getting emailed back and forth between ourselves and the contributors. And it just brought to the surface for me all the various ways that I love and hate word processors. So just to tee this whole idea up, we're writing all the time. We probably do more writing than anything else in our field, even more than actual field work. And there's a whole range, between note taking on the one hand, and annotations, small little a sentence or two or a small paragraph here, through reports and articles, monographs, books, all the way up to very long documents. And What I distinctly want to avoid talking about right at the moment, unless you want to bring it back in, are the short ones, things like notes and annotations. I want to talk about the particular tools that we use for doing any kind of longer document, anything that's, multiple pages, and try to circle in on some of the issues around these and what kind of tools are being used and what kind of tools we wish people would use more frequently.
Yeah.
So how much writing do you use?
Well, quite a bit actually, because I'm writing for, even for the podcast. This is an audio format podcast, but this isn't really long form writing. But I used to write blog posts associated with the podcast when I had that overlap period when my blog was starting at the same time the podcast was. Right. So a lot of times I'd write out the podcast first. But right nowadays it's reports and draft reports and things like that. But I think my one major comment on word processing platforms and writing platforms is learn the damn platform, because I'll tell you what, a lot of people, I'm not a huge fan of Microsoft Word, partly because we have to use it so often, but and people always require like a Word document specifically, right? Because they don't know how to open anything else. But here's the thing. A lot of people complain about Microsoft Word for the same reason they complain about other software programs, is because they don't understand it. Do you know how many people I say Word doesn't line things up when I bullet the list properly, and then I look over somebody's shoulder and they're spacing, right, like their indent, and then putting in a dash or something like that, and then spacing again. It's like, well, it's not Word's problem. You don't understand how to use tabs. Like you don't know how to use tabs. You don't know how to use, first line indent and make sure all that stuff is automatic. And I think setting up templates and, more importantly, training programs for your employees to say, hey, these are the things we use 99% of the time, and here's the best way to do it. And in fact, I'll link in the show notes, my Dig Tech Learn page, which at the very bottom has only 3 posts. I intended to do a lot more, but I think I just lost steam on it. Only 3 posts on my Word for Archaeologists series, which I'm sure is still current. It was a few years back, but I've got one on tabs, one on, I don't even know what. So go check that out, but it's in the show notes. But anyway, the point is, with any software program, if you're doing something repeatedly, chances are you can automate that. If you're doing something repeatedly, you can put it in a template. If you're doing something repeatedly, there's a hotkey for it, or you can create a hotkey for it. And just keep that in mind. And that's the whole thing with word processing programs. We hate them, but they're a necessary evil in our business, and just learn it. That's all I got to say.
I agree with you, but boy, there's a lot to unpack there. So when we started on this project, I really wanted people to use collaborative tools, things like Google Docs.
Sure.
I would, from my programming background, I would have much preferred people to just use text documents that I could throw into, into a version control system like Git, and really finally control what changed in the content of the documents they were sending us. But of course, nobody else was willing to do that. My wife, who's edited a number of different volumes in her capacity at the museum, said, "Yeah, this is never going to fly. Nobody's ever going to even use Google Docs, even if they know how to use it. We're going to have to use Word because that's what everybody uses." And the publisher also said, "Yeah, give us Word documents. That's the only thing we're going to accept." So the first thing I said was, well, let's simplify the matter for the contributors, for the writers. And so I created a set of templates. I stripped out all the styles that were not ever going to be used to just have a handful of styles. We synthesized the rules so that the publisher gave us, so we could present that to the writers and say, format this in this way, format that in that way, format this in the other way. And I made a custom template for each one of the contributors that had just those styles, had track changes turned on, had some people used it beautifully. And, if they wanted to make a new heading, they put in the word and they highlighted it and they hit the heading button and they got a heading. Other people kind of use it halfway. They, put in the heading and then they highlighted it and then they bolded it and they underlined it. Some people went ahead and used their own normal template from their own installation of Word. And then I'd have to go and convert that back into the template that I had originally provided them. So there's really good intentions to using templates, but people aren't always familiar with how to use, for example, styles as opposed to styled text.
Yeah.
Where you can have a semantic style. Actually, let me back up a little bit. So when Apple first came out with MacWrite, there was a debate about how they were going to allow people to style the text. And the debate was basically highlight the text, turn it bold, italic, underlined, whatever, or highlight the text and declare what kind of a part of the text it was, a header, a title, a block quote, whatever. And that would adjust everything else. Now, obviously, the right answer is the second way, semantically. This here is the header in this part of my article. Therefore, mark it up as a header. And then, we can mark them globally across all of them and decide to make them all, purple or rainbow colored or whatever is appropriate, or, bold and slightly bigger than everything else. And then the other way is taking and adjusting every little bit of text as you go through. And people just even, 30 years on from word processors really becoming a big thing, people are still totally unclear with the kind of semantic markup.
Yeah.
And that's a problem. I wish more people understood it, because it makes managing one's documents so much easier, and makes then, people not have to do the same thing that you were talking about, spacing to get the right spacing, hitting the space bar all those times, instead of just setting your tab stops and going there, or even better yet, telling the document template, this kind of a structure, a list needs to be tabbed in this much. And then you just say, this is that kind of a list, and boom, it turns into what you needed. Mm-hmm. Oh, okay. Yeah. I got that off my chest.
Well, and
that's not really particularly a word problem. That's across any word processor.
That's an excellent point. I was actually just going to say that, because that's a fundamental misunderstanding of word processing programs. And it's one of the things that it's interesting. I was editing the CRM Archaeology podcast today, which, as you're listening to this, it's already out. So go check out 176 if you want to know what I'm talking about here. But Bill White, one of the hosts, went to the ACRA conference, and one of the things they were talking about was, what are the effectiveness of CRM grad school programs and undergrad programs? What did you learn the most? What thing that you did you learn the most? Blah, 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 right? But ended up being a discussion that also centered around things like certain skills you're supposed to learn and stuff like that. And we always focus on the archaeological skills, but we don't focus on anything else. We say, go write a paper, but we don't say, and here's how you use a word processing program. Here's what styles means. Here's what, all this little stuff is. And once you learn that, Google Docs use it, Word uses it, Pages for Mac uses it. Pretty much any word processing program, unless it's something that we might get to on the list here that's completely different, but essentially they still use kind of the same rules, right?
Right.
And it's just, once you understand those rules, man, you can use almost anything.
Yeah, anything. Well, that's actually one of the interesting things, I think, historically, is how Word came to be the dominant one, how it's the 800-pound gorilla. Because back in the day, I had already mentioned MacWrite. I wrote a lot of things in MacWrite back when I was in high school, as an earnest and undergrad. WordPerfect was humongous. It was probably the first big word processor. Do you remember Nisus Writer?
God, I know the name, but I'm not sure I'd ever used it. That
was on the Mac. It was in the 90s. And what it really excelled at was text with multiple character sets. So like a Chinese friend of mine could mix and match Chinese and English in the same document. Uh-huh. I knew people that were writing, and they'd have like transliterations with the extended alphabet in various Semitic scripts. And they could have that with the Latin alphabet with all these wacky diacritics that WordPerfect and Word would just absolutely cough up along on anytime you gave it to them. Nisus Writer was targeted at people like that who had to write in multiple different scripts. It could handle, mixed left to right and right to left in the same document, which if you're somebody like me that works in the Middle East, that's kind of important.
Yeah.
But then Word slowly, I don't even know how it got to the dominance, but it's now to the point that nobody really uses any other word processor if they're using a word processor other than Word. There are edge cases, Pages being a big one.
It's dominant. It's dominant because of Windows.
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, there are other ones. I steer a lot of people towards LibreOffice in general as kind of an catch-all Microsoft Office replacement. And it's kind of a clone of a slightly older version of Microsoft Office. Really smart in some things, kind of clunky in others. But, there are things that will work as Word replacements. LibreOffice Pages, which I already mentioned, will export Word beautifully. Import it depending on how complicated the Word document is, either beautifully or less so. But you can use it for collaboration if you're really upset with the particular layout of the tool set in Word. But it's Word as a file format is the default interchange format now too.
Yeah, it's crazy that like DocX or something like that is just expected that anyone can open that. My Civil Air Patrol Squadron, we get documents sent down to us, like agendas and other documents and things like that sent to us from the wing officers above us. And more often than not, they're in a DocX format. And they just first off, send me a PDF. Second, don't just assume everybody can open this. I mean, there's actually somebody in my squadron. She hasn't paid for Office 365. Her computer didn't come with it, and she doesn't want to use it. She uses Google Docs and everything else. So she actually can't open a Word document. Now, you can import them into something like Google Docs, but the import there is kind of messed up too. It's not perfect, but just making the assumption that people can open that is kind of a weird thing. People don't even think about it as proprietary software. No.
Well, actually, you're also hinting at something. I don't know if I want to jump into this one right now, but the division when we're thinking of word processing, between creating the document and displaying the document, right? So if it's just something somebody needs to read and nobody ever needs to edit it again, that PDF is a wonderful format because it looks identical on your computer as it does on my computer. The Word document, I've got an older version of Word. I don't have Word. I'm opening in LibreOffice. We have a different set of fonts installed on our computers. It can go all different ways between what you think it looks like as the creator and what I think it looks like as the recipient. That's a problem too.
Yeah, not only that, but 99% of the time, the first time I look at an email and its attachment is on my phone. And I'll tell you what, doing a quick view on a Word document on your phone, the formatting is all messed up because the phone just doesn't know how to handle it. But a PDF display is exactly like it's supposed to.
Right.
Yeah. So
I'm a big fan of PDFs for that specific reason.
Yeah, for sure. Plus the aspect that you can't really, you can change a PDF with a lot of extra tools, but generally somebody's not going to change a PDF. But if you pull up a Word document as like an official document, which I was just sent the other day from somebody at Nevada Wing, it's like this official notice that, we've got this inspection coming up, and he sends it as a Word document. Like, I just change the date if I don't feel like doing it right now and say, hey, you sent me this. How's he going to know? Probably doesn't know how to use track changes. So yeah, it's crazy. Anyway. All right. Well, that's actually a good spot to take our first break, and we will come back on the other side and continue this discussion about tools that we use once the fieldwork is done. Back in a second. Chris Webster here for the Archaeology Podcast Network. We strive for high quality interviews and content so you can find information on any topic in archaeology from around the world. One way we do that is by recording interviews with our hosts and guests located in many parts of the world all at once. We do that through the use of Zencastr. That's Zencastr. Zencastr allows us to record high quality audio with no stress on the guest. Just send them a link to click on and that's it. Zencastr does the rest. They even do automatic transcriptions. Check out the link in the show notes for 30% off your first 3 months, or go to zencastr.com and use the code ArchaeoTech. That's ARCHAEOTECH.
Well, we got a minute. I'm going to buy that truck I've been wanting.
Wait, don't you need weeks to shop for a car?
I don't. Carvana makes it super convenient to find exactly what I want.
Hold up. You're buying a car on your phone? Isn't that more of a laptop thing?
You can shop wherever you want.
I like to do my research, read reviews, compare models. Plus, Carvana has thousands of options. How'd you decide on that truck?
Because I like it.
Oh, that is a great reason.
Go to Carvana.com to sell your car the convenient way.
Welcome back to episode 116 of the ArchaeoTech Podcast, and we are talking about tools that we use once the fieldwork is done. So what's next up on the list here, Paul?
Well, the big one here for me is collaboration. Like I said, the whole reason why I'm thinking about word processors so much lately is because we're working on a volume, and we've got about a dozen different contributors, and we've got 3 different editors. And so we have because everybody uses Word, we're stuck in this very file-centric way of collaborating with each other, of getting draft 1 from the writer to me, getting the revisions back to the next editor, getting those revisions to the next editor, getting the revised draft 1 back to the writer, who can then accept, reject, so on, and send it back. And the circle goes around a few times. And so I, for years, have hated this kind of a workflow where one takes a document and then emails it to somebody else to work on that document, because it's so easy to accidentally open the wrong one. You open the wrong email and you download that, and suddenly you're working on the entirely wrong piece of text. And, or if somebody has not sent you the latest version and you're making changes on version 1, but they're already well into version 2, then you have work that has to be melded. Now, in the computer programming world, we can deal with that to some extent through version control like Git, and you do merges and resolve conflicts and so on. But we can't do that with Word, which is a huge reason why I like a lot of the new tools that we have, things like Google Docs, Office 365, or Apple Pages and iCloud, in that if you and I, Chris, are working on the same document, say I've created one in Google Docs, I can make a change, you can make a change. We can both be working on that same document simultaneously. We'll see each other's changes just happen there. And these online tools also bring along that version control. So if somebody screws something up, we can just look back through the history of it very easily and find it there. It's baked into it. It's not a separate feature like it is in Word, where the track changes is something you have to explicitly turn on, and you have to go through in a certain set way of working with it. And I'll get into track changes again, because I've got lots of opinions about track changes. Actually, one, and it's all stinky. But the collaboration, that I think is again, I work at a school. We started using Google Docs on Google Apps for our school domain a number of years ago, and it's really taken off. So students now hardly ever write in any word processor. They almost exclusively write in Google Docs. And the reason is it saves automatically. And if they're working on any collaborative project with anybody, they can just do it simply. They share it to them, and there's never, ever a question about who has the latest version of whatever. And that is such a liberating way of working versus the mailing files back and forth like we had done for the previous 15 years before that. And yeah, I just can't say enough things about this new way of working, but it's not the way that the scholars that are putting together this book that we're editing are used to working, so we can't do it.
Well, that goes almost back to a problem with, quote, scholars in general, which is people really get stuck in their ways, especially, I hate to say, the older generation, but that it's not exclusive to an, quote, older generation, basically anybody out of their 20s. So I'm including myself in that. But it's not exclusive to them either. There's a lot of people, specifically in archaeology, that really get stuck in their ways. I look at 25-year-olds that have a 8-year-old cell phone because they either can't afford a new one, or don't want to afford a new one, or don't want to get a new one. And they're like, I can't handle this. And I was just dealing with somebody the other day that I need to contact on Slack all the time, but they didn't have a phone capable of loading Slack. And this person is in their 20s. And I was like, what is going on here? And then they got a new one, and finally now we can communicate together. But anyway, it's interesting. And I think, I don't know how to change it other than enforcing the change. Like, for example, I always bring up my Civil Air Patrol squadron because it's such an anomaly to me. Half the people in this squadron are over the age of 65, and because it's more of a thing conducive to people who are retired, right? And I don't know if it's just a subset of people that are just inherently smarter and more I guess, less resistant to change than the average group of humans that joins something that, these civil electrical people, I brought Slack into the mix. I brought Google Docs into the mix, and they're all just like jumping on it. Now, it took a period of adjustment. Like when somebody would send me a Word document and say, what do you think about this? I would say, convert that to a Google Doc and send me the link. Like I simply wouldn't look at it, and I just had to be that forceful about it. And now it's a regular thing. And, it's I don't know what to tell you. It is a period of adjustment though, to use those collaborative documents and to go. But once you go that direction, I also think that just one final note here, you were mentioning students using Google Docs exclusively. Man, that really just eliminates the excuse, oh, my computer, power supply failed, or my hard drive failed, or something like that. Like if you get that excuse now as a professor or a teacher in some way, then that student should still be penalized, or you're being lied to. Yeah. So I mean, Google Docs saves after every space bar you hit. I mean, it's just constantly saving. Yeah.
Actually, this is tangential, but when that transition happened between kids using standalone word processors and using Google Docs, I was so happy because people stopped doing that. They stopped, working for 2 hours on a paper, have their computer crash, and lose all the last 2 hours of work. Right? Yeah. That was a constant thing. That would happen at least once a week, 15 years ago. And now it doesn't happen. So I was very happy when people transitioned, and then they didn't have to remember to save early, save often, which was my mantra for them always. But now what's happened is they've gotten so used to never having to save that if they are working on something, they're working on a Photoshop painting or something, they're working on something in Illustrator, they're working on something that is still the old style file metaphor rather, on their computer, they forget to save because they've gotten so conditioned never to have to save. So it's actually kind of come around full circle. It doesn't happen nearly the same rate that it used to, and very rarely with the same kind of dire repercussions. I was working on the term paper all night and then lost it. But it does happen now because people have forgotten that you have to save. So.
Well, and the interesting thing about that is, again, it goes back to learning the software that you're using, because Word for a really long time has had an autosave feature, and you can adjust the time frame on that autosave feature, right? And it's funny you bring up the example of Photoshop, because I don't know about Photoshop specifically, but I would guess it's the same as Adobe Audition, because it's all Adobe products, right? And I use Adobe Audition on a daily basis to edit podcasts, and I have had that app crash more than a handful of times. And in fact, I'd say it probably crashes several times a week. To be honest, it's very resource intensive. And if I just decided to edit a podcast while I'm doing 700 other things, which is typically the case, then chances are I'm going to overtax my laptop and it's going to crash. That's just what's going to happen. But I've got my autosave set to, I think it's 5 minutes, because autosaving does actually take up a lot of resources as well, because it's also looking and saving in the background and doing different things. So I don't have it set too tight, but every 5 minutes is okay. I can recover 5 minutes worth of work. But like I said, I don't know of any programs today that honestly don't have an autosave feature of some way, like creating a backup or just creating a save. One of those two things. I know Adobe products create a backup as well. And I don't know what invokes the backup. I'd have to look at that. But every time I look at my backup file for a single podcast, there's like 15 copies of the backup file there, so I could step it back if I needed to. But again, it goes back to learning your program. Yeah, which I guess is a general rule for life. Know the tools, know how to use the tools before you cut your fingers off. Yeah. Speaking of tools, though, I've already mentioned it, and I just have to get in my complaints. Here it comes. Version control. My note here, it says, is there a lower level of hell than Word's track changes feature? The answer is no, there is not. Nice. Yeah. So I really dislike the track changes. We have to use it heavily, so somebody changes, we make a change as we're editing somebody's article, a word choice
or we make a comment, which is done through the track changes, hey, you didn't cite this, or the citation doesn't match what's in the bibliography, or we make a comment like, could you explain this a little more carefully because it's unclear. We make some changes that just have to go through, but we still have to see get the writer's approval. So, for example, the style guides tell us to use BCE instead of BC. Well,
right.
A lot of the people wrote BC or maybe B period, C period, and we have to change it all to the same BCE, uppercase, no periods. That needs to be captured in the track changes so the author can see it and click OK and accept it. And that's just part of the process. So that's the way it should work. But we've had so many edge cases where things don't work quite the way you'd expect. One of them being, it's deadly easy to just go over to the track changes, turn it off, make whatever changes we need, and then turn it back on so that they kind of go silent. That doesn't happen with Google Docs. Everything is preserved in the Google Docs. Actually, I do that. My main job on this editing is the final step. The other two are reading it mostly for content. I'm the one that goes through and is trying to fix all the mechanics. So I'm making sure that they don't use ampersands in inline citations. That inline citations are always done a certain way. That if somebody did period instead of using the proper ellipsis character, I replace it. If they use 2 spaces after a period, I replace it with 1 space. All that sort of silly mechanical stuff. Things are named consistently, whatever. So I'm actually often turning track changes off to make those really simple little, they're not meaningful changes. They're just to enforce consistency in the style between one article and the next article in this volume.
Right.
But then I found other things, like somebody had a very long footnote and they had citations in there that weren't in the bibliography. Okay, fine. So track changes turn on. I want to make a comment on it. I can't actually comment on the content of the footnote in Word. I have to comment on the marker where the footnote was made. All our footnotes are endnotes too by the style guide.
Yeah.
So that means that 15 pages before the footnote actually shows up, I have to make a comment that says, hey, the footnote that this goes to, your third citation isn't mentioned in the bibliography, isn't included in the bibliography. What gives? So I can't even put the comment right where it belongs. I have to put it pages and pages and pages earlier. That really bugs me. And then one of the other things, and this isn't track changes per se, but this is related because of the job that I have on this particular volume, is that forever on the Mac, find is Command F, find next is Command G. Word does that, but doesn't always want to go into the footnotes when you do the Command G. Sometimes it does. I haven't figured out why it does sometimes and why it doesn't other times. But if you're in a footnote and you do a Command G, it doesn't go find the next. It throws you into an entirely different view of the document. It opens up a panel at the bottom, and I'm not even sure what it's trying to do. I just, so I'll be going along, trying to find double spaces, right? So space in the find bar, right? Command F, I find the first one, I change it. Command G, change. Command G, Command G, Command G. I end up in a footnote, Command G, boom. It throws me into a different part of the program.
Oh my God.
It's not even consistent with the way that I've done things for 35 years on a Mac, or the way that it does it internally within the same program in the same document. So I'm finding the whole matter of that kind of version control and the mechanical kinds of editing to be extremely obtrusive. I'm not able to work comfortably. I'm always fighting the tool, and I do believe I know how to use the tool, but I find the tool very badly designed.
Yes. Well, I got to tell you, there are some, just so people know, there are some adjustments you can make to track changes. I think there's a track change tracking options option, and I'm not sure. I couldn't even tell you where this is because in different versions of Word, it's going to be in different locations.
Of course.
Yeah, you can make some modifications to the track changes, but like you said, people have to use it right in order to really use it effectively and not make it super, super annoying. I wish you could restrict, and maybe you can, but I wonder if you can restrict what it actually picks up as a track change. Because like you mentioned, if you just somebody included 3 spaces instead of, 1 or something like that, whatever your metric is, and you just backspace it, does that really need a track change? You know what I mean?
That's why I turn it off. But because I'm doing a mix of things that do require their approval, BC to BCE, and things that don't, space to single space, I'm constantly toggling it on and off.
Right.
And how it highlights what's been changed is never consistent. But that's a whole different rant.
Yeah,
or
exactly.
if I want to make a comment on one of the other comments or changes that have been tracked, that's a really interesting can of worms. I haven't been able to figure out how to effectively and consistently do that either.
Yes. Well, I did find a great website here from lawyerist.com, and they've got a page called Microsoft Word for Lawyers. And I dropped that in our, I'll drop that in our links here to have on our show notes. So check it out. It's actually got a really comprehensive guide to all the major formatting things we've been talking about. And this is well put together, and judging by some of the ribbon images I'm seeing here, it's for relatively new versions of Word, not a super old document here. So yeah, we'll check that out. All right. Well, we are running out of time here. What are some of the last things you really want to get in, Paul?
Okay. So I also mentioned this, when I said about writing that document versus giving it to somebody else, displaying it. So that's another confusion, in my opinion, in what we mean about word processing. I mean, already at the very start said we're not going to talk about short notes, because that can be handled a number of different ways and doesn't, even though people often will write their short notes in something like Word, it's not necessarily a word processing problem. But so between word processing, which I consider the process of writing something of some length, a page or more, let's say, and page layout, assembling the bits into something that somebody's going to see. And I have found that the tools for word processing, be they LibreOffice Writer, be they WordPerfect, Nicest Writer, MacWrite, Word, Pages is weird. It kind of straddles. The tools for word processing and the tools for page layout are very different, and that trying to get one to do the other's job is usually an exercise in failure. And I first discovered that 20 years ago now, when I was doing a temp job with some museum consultants, and they used Adobe FrameMaker really heavily. And this was a program that was meant for books, for long documents. And it was brilliant at incorporating chunks of text that the head of the company would write elsewhere, and we'd copy and paste in, and it would flow them nicely. And we could, the best feature that it had, I loved, was that you could make things variables, right? So if you had boilerplate, like Dear John, every time you said John, you could use that same letter and send it to Peter and just say, client's name equals, and you switch it, and it goes globally across the 100-page document without having to do find and replace. There are other, this one was very much geared towards long chunks of text. It wasn't so visually oriented, but it was a way of managing and organizing a very long document. As an aside, Word, I find if you get too long of a document, it often will start to self-corrupt. So my one of my coworkers was just telling me about his mother-in-law, who is an academic and was writing a book and just lost her entire work because she didn't have good backups. She was working off one document for the entire book, all the different chapters, and it started to corrupt, and it just got itself into a state that she couldn't open it. They could retrieve bits of text, but they couldn't really work with it anymore. So if you're working with Word and you have something that's multiple chapters, make each chapter its own file. That's my caveat. But then there are other ones. Quark Express was really big, especially in the advertising community, for page layout. PageMaker is still huge, and these are very good for taking that text that you've written somewhere else and making it into something that you can present to somebody. And so I just wanted to, as a general caveat for our listeners, is that if you can separate the concerns between writing and editing on one hand and making a document on the other hand, do so. They're two different classes of software.
Well, I'll make one note on page layout before we end this section here. To me, the biggest difference between, of course, page layout and what you would consider the normal way to use Microsoft Word or Pages or something like that, which would be the word processing side, is word processing. Essentially, your entire document is a text box, right? Your entire document is, you're putting text in there, and that's what it's designed for. And between like Pages, which is Mac based, and then Microsoft Word, the way they handle things that you drag and drop in there, like images and things like that, how the text flows around it. Some of them handle it really well and some don't. Pages does that really well. It just kind of does what you need it to do intuitively, because they said, hey, we think most people are going to want to do this. And so they do that. And typically it works. With Microsoft, my God, it's like you can spend hours just reformatting how a picture displays on the page and then anchoring it and make sure it doesn't move with the text or does it with the text. Why would you ever not want an image to move with the text? That's what I want to know. But, anyway, why that's even an option? Like, why is that the default? Anyway, I don't know. Back to page layout. I think in most people's concerns or cases, they're going to use page layout for very short documents like a brochure or a flyer or something like that, because you think of page layout as basically creating a collage. And that collage is like when you would paste on things onto a piece of paper, like from magazines or something like that, creating a mood board or whatever they call it. That's kind of page layout, except you're pasting a text box, and then you're pasting an image, and then you're pasting a title, and then you're pasting these other things.
Right.
And you're moving those things around. And they do have some cool features, like you mentioned before, that frame software, or whatever it was. Like I know in Pages.
It doesn't exist anymore. It's long dead. Sadly.
Yeah. Well, you could create conceivably a huge document using page layout view and then type it in something else. And then I know in Pages, and I'm sure you can do it in Word, you can have the text boxes flow from one box to the next if there's too much text for it. And the neat way to think about that is you can have it flow in any direction, like from this box to this box. That box doesn't have to be under it or next to it. It could be 10 pages away, and you're still going to flow into that next box. And that's a pretty cool way to think about page layout. So, but I wouldn't use it for a really long document for most people. That's going to take some serious formatting. But if you have, like my wife creates knitting patterns all the time, and she has a page layout document because she has her patterns look the same way with the same styles and the same kind of formatting every single time. But I told her, actually create this in another document, because as you're creating this pattern, you don't want to have to fill up a box and then go to the next box and go to the next box as you're typing in. You shouldn't type in a page layout document. You should do it somewhere else and then copy it in. And then I had the boxes flow from one to the next, so it separates the chunks of her pattern accordingly. And then you can do things like, like section breaks and text box breaks and stuff like that to say, well, this one broke here, but I actually want it to break here and flow everything else to the next box. And then just do a little bit of work to it, but already have your layout done, which is pretty amazing. If you're doing a consistent layout all the time, create that layout and then create the text somewhere else, and then just flow it in, and bam, your formatting's done. So many people spend hours formatting like a flyer in Microsoft Word. I'm like, just don't do it. Yeah.
Back to beat the same dead horse that I've already said. It's separating content from display, right?
Yeah.
And I like tools for writing that let you focus on the content, and then if you need to display it to somebody else, worry about that as a separate step in the process.
Yeah, there's a big reason big companies have a technical writing department and a design department. They're not the same people. One's going to double check your stuff for consistency of a technical writing standpoint. Then they're going to hand it to the design department, and they're going to make your report. Big, huge engineering firms have that, and you don't have to worry about it. You just create the text. You send it to somebody to double check that text, and then they send it to design, and now all the reports look the same. Right. There's a reason those aren't the same people. So.
And then to just bring it back full circle to what I was starting to say is that if you do that writing and where you have things that have to be marked as certain kinds of elements, a block text, a block quote rather, or a heading, those were the examples I said early on, you give it the style that is named that, and then anybody else can restyle it very simply and globally, because it's just a tag on this chunk of text. It's going to be, shown in this way or not shown in that way, rather than going through and overly manipulating each little piece.
Yeah. And pro tip, if you understand how to use styles, you don't actually have to highlight an entire paragraph. If you're doing more than one paragraph, then you have to highlight those, but you don't actually even have to highlight all the words. You just have to highlight across both paragraphs. So you can highlight the last 2 characters of one and the first 2 of the next one. And when you click that style, it's going to apply it to the paragraph, because styles work on paragraphs, not on highlighted text. So as long as your cursor is in that paragraph and you click that style, it should change the entire paragraph or the whole line. You don't have to bother yourself with highlighting. Might sound insignificant, but hey, if you can save a micro fraction of a second right now, the amount of times we use these things, I might just saved you hours worth of time. So there you go. Across your life. Hey, there you go. All right. Well, that's enough about word processing programs. We've literally lost all of our listeners, and we're going to try to go rebuild our audience over the break and come back for the App of the Day segment. Back in a second.
Introducing Zaxby's new chicken finger tacos. One with pico and creamy chipotle ranch, and the other with bacon and avocado ranch. Chicken expert since 1990. Taco expert since now. Woo, saucy! Zaxby's.
America. We are endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. By honoring your sacred vocation of business, you impact your family, your friends, and your community. At Grand Canyon University, our MBA degree program is 100% online, with emphases in business analytics and finance to help you reach your goals. Find your purpose at GCU. Private, Christian, affordable. Visit gcu.edu.
Welcome back to episode 116 of the ArchaeoTech Podcast, and this is your App of the Day segment. And thankfully, neither of us are talking about, I don't think Paul is, because I think I know what his is, but we're not talking about word processing programs. My App of the Day is not Microsoft Word. So, however, as some people may know, I'm going to preface this with a little bit of a story, but I've mentioned this on the podcast before, but I bought a boat like 3 months ago, right? And we've now put it in a marina in the Bay Area in California, so we can use it over the winter rather than winterizing it over the winter and not using it at all, because I really love going out there. In fact, my wife is out of town next week for like 6 days. So I'm going to go out there on, I think, Tuesday night, the day she leaves, and spend basically Wednesday through Sunday on the boat, just working, from the boat, take it around to different places where I've got cell service or Wi-Fi, make my calls, do my editing, do all my stuff that I need to do, and just work from the boat, because I love it. But that boat's not designed for that. So I've been watching these YouTube videos from this one couple who call themselves digital nomads. They've been digital nomads since 2006. They started in a van, went to an RV, and now they're on a 50-foot, well, I think it's a 48-foot Bayliner 4788 with a flying bridge. And it's an awesome boat. The models from like the 90s are really great. They're usually in awesome condition, and it's just a fun thing. And it's kind of a goal to, buy something like that and live on it for a couple of years and just tool around. But anyway, the point is to make money, because they still have full-time jobs. They have this website, which I'll link to in the show notes. I forgot all about it, but they create apps and other things. They have this website that's all for digital nomads, which is great for archaeologists, because it's all these tools and things and gear reviews and stuff you would need for a life on the road. But in order to supplement that, they also create apps. And a couple of the apps, I talked about one last week called Coverage ? And I actually just downloaded the paid version of that today because I got a bundle of their apps. And the one I want to talk about today, they call their app company 2 Steps Beyond. But the one I want to talk about today is just called State Lines. And it's super simple. It basically is, it's amazing how simple it is. When I open it up, what I see is a list of states, right? And I can organize these by alphabetical, by distance, which is super cool. So I can see, how, my state and then the ones that are near me. And then there's 3 pieces of information right on that state, and I can choose which pieces of information display in this quick view. Right now I've got average local tax rate, just because I haven't played with it very much, rest area, overnight rules, and time zone, right? And that's a really cool thing, and I can change what I see in that quick view. But once I click into the state, I can see pages and pages and pages of information about that state. Now, these guys developed this app when they were RVers full time, and they still do that part time, but they need to know when they're going into a new state, what are some of the rules and regulations here? What are the, I don't know. They've got wine and beer tax. I like seeing that. How much are people charging? Should I buy my alcohol in Utah or should I buy it in Colorado? I think everybody knows the answer to that question. But anyway, all kinds of different things. The time zone, it's just a really great tool for people who are traveling around and constantly crossing from state to state. I mean, something in here that really pertains to an archaeologist, not myself and necessarily, but marijuana usage. This one right here says for Oregon, recreational and medicinal. You know, if you're a smoker of that sort of thing, then you're probably going to want to know that. Texting bans, cell phone bans, you know, leash laws, default speed limits. What are the left turn on red rules? That's an interesting thing to have in there. Right on red arrow rules, U-turns, keep right rules for like highway driving and stuff like that. Just a lot of really cool things, a lot of interesting information. Max tow speed, 55 miles per hour, right there for Oregon. So anyway, it's a great little application. The only free one that I think they have is their Coverage Lite, which shows you cell coverage for different areas and different carriers and providers, and it'll show you all of them for a certain period of time and then default back to one if you're not going to pay for it. But it's like $2.99, and I'm more than happy to support them. And I think I paid $8.99 on the Apple App Store for 3 of their apps, including the coverage, the regular coverage version that gives you HD coverage plus all the carriers and the different, you can sort by 2G up to LTE. And then the other 2 apps that I got, and I'll talk about the other one next time around. But I think it's called Public Lands. So I'll talk about that on the next episode. But hey, $8.99 to support these guys that are making these apps, and their iOS and Android. So it's pretty great. I linked to their website for the State Lines app because it has the iOS and Android link. So check that out in the show notes, but check out the rest of their site. And I'll put a link to their mobile internet, mobile nomad, whatever they call it, site. So you can check that out as well. So that's all I've got. Paul, what do you have?
Well, that sounds like it's really useful for shovel bums in particular.
Absolutely. Yeah.
If they're traveling around doing work outside of their home state or between states, or you spent a fair amount of time like traveling across the country when you were doing your shovel bum thing, right?
Yeah, I did. And it made me realize something too that I hadn't even thought of. The RVing community, which is a huge community of people that just live in their RVs or take extended vacations in their RVs. There's no difference between them and shovel bums. And the only major difference is most of them are doing it on vacation or while they're retired, but they still have all the same concerns. You know, where am I going to get internet access? How much does it cost for a campsite? You know, all these different things. And there's a ton of resources out there for RVers that shovel bums can definitely use and piggyback on.
Yeah, no, that sounds very useful. So, mine, on the other hand, is not for people on the move. It's more for homebodies, and as is my want, it's not an app in particular, but there's an app related to it. So I'm not totally off base this time. A couple of years ago, one of the director of IT here got a Google Wi-Fi for his house, for his apartment in the city, and he was raving about it. It's a set of 3 different access points, and they work together in what's called a mesh Wi-Fi. And he was really impressed, not just with the hardware, but also with the software that came with it. So I've been keeping an eye out on similar sorts of mesh Wi-Fis for a while. So Google Wi-Fi is one that you've probably heard of. It's they've now released Nest, or Google Nest Wi-Fi, which I guess is an upgrade of it. I just found out about that the other day, so I don't know what's the difference. Netgear has Orbi, O-R-B-I. There's Eero, E-E-R-O. There are a whole bunch of other smaller ones that I see. If you just go on Amazon and look for mesh Wi-Fi, you'll see. And so as I was looking for Google Wi-Fi over the summer to see if maybe the price had dropped at all, the one that popped up on the Amazon search for me was TP-Link's Deco mesh Wi-Fi. And I hadn't heard anything about it in particular, but it's a class of the same kind of network infrastructure. And it had really good ratings, and the price was excellent. So it was on sale when I got it. So I've got a place in the country that we live at, and I have gone through every kind of Wi-Fi possible up there over the years, with varying effects. Basically, so I've gone like custom routers with DDWRT running on them, and repeaters and all sorts of stuff. And for the last couple of years, I've been running just the Wi-Fi that comes on the Xfinity cable box that came into the house, where it comes in the basement, and then a repeater a little itty bitty box that plugs into the wall. I mean, it's totally unobtrusive, up on one of the other floors to kind of reflect it up higher. And the problem with repeaters is that that a repeater, the way it works is it takes the Wi-Fi signal and it rebroadcasts it. What that means effectively is that anytime you put a repeater in your system, you're having the throughput on the Wi-Fi. And so if you put in 2 repeaters, you've got a quarter of your original throughput. So repeaters don't scale out very well. And then there's a variety of other problems. Some of the fancier firmwares I've used, I could give the repeated signal the same SSID, the same network name as the main signal. Others, I had to use different ones. I had to use a different name than the main signal. I've had some routers that are dual band. They do 2.4 gigahertz and they do 5 gigahertz, and I could give them the same SSID. Some of them I had to give them separate SSIDs. So there's just been, I've never settled on a system that I like. There were always drawbacks, and even with the latest one that I'd had for the last couple of years, every now and then the repeated signal just stops working. Sometimes it stops working in a way so that's so bad that it screws up the main signal, and I have to just reset everything. But at the very least, I was finding myself having to reset the repeater at least once a month. And that got really old. And then I saw this TP-Link for sale. It was under 150. And I said, to hell with it. I'm going to treat myself and get this. The big difference then between mesh Wi-Fis and a repeater is that they have more antennas. And some of those antennas are the ones that you as the end user see. They're the ones that reflect your signal. And some of them are just used for the backhaul. They're used for the different access points to talk to each other. Some things like the TP-Link, which I have, and the Google Wi-Fi, any one of the access points can be the main one, and the other ones you just need to put on a power outlet. Oh yeah, I've also tried Powerline, which sends your network signal over the power lines in the building, with varying success. So I've tried everything under the sun to get the whole house wired nicely. So the TP-Link came with 3 different access points. I plugged in, turned off the Wi-Fi on the Xfinity, put one in right there next to the router, put one up on the first floor, and then put another one up in the attic. And now the whole house is bathed. It's all got the exact same SSID. I don't have, the 5 gigahertz SSID and the 2.4 gigahertz SSID and the repeater SSID. It's just one. And it's fast. There's no degradation of signal speed anywhere in the house. And I love it. And the reason why I'm saying this under app of the day is regardless of which ones you use of these, they all have a tie-in app that helps you name and configure the different the access points for your network. And the TP-Link one isn't the slickest thing, but it certainly does the job. The Google Wi-Fi one is really, really cool in that it'll help you find optimal placement for the peripheral, for the secondary access points, the ones that you're placing elsewhere in the house. So I just wanted, if people weren't aware of this whole class of Wi-Fi networks, and they've got a house that has spotty Wi-Fi in certain places, it's definitely worth looking into. Not just because the hardware of these is all good, it's tested, it's understood how it works and why it works, and it makes a lot of sense, but also because these companies have all put effort into making complementary apps to the configuration and in some case optimization of your network. Last week, the week before, I bought another set of 3 for use in the apartment that we stay at during the week. And that has had the same set of problems that I've always had with up in the country. And suddenly I have no such problems. The only issue I had is that in the country, I used one SSID, and in the city, I used the same SSID. And the TP-Link Deco app does not like that I have 2 different networks with the same SSID. Yeah. Because it names them, it names the network off of the SSID. Right. So if I wanted to separate them in the app, I would have to call them, OPSU Brewster and OPSU Manhattan or something like that, and then it would be happy. But I called them both OPSU. That's the Abyss and Acadian, in case you're wondering. That's the archaeological tie-in right there.
Wow. There it is.
There we go. It doesn't like that, and so it was a little confused. So it took a little extra effort to get the second one set up versus the first one.
Yeah. Okay. Well, my comment on all this is for years, I am like just about everybody else, and I would, just have my Wi-Fi router. That's usually the all-in-one, or you've got your router, then you've got the Wi-Fi plugged into it, and tucked away somewhere in the house, right? So nobody can see it because you don't want it to just be out there.
Right.
But obviously that's going to destroy the Wi-Fi in the rest of your house. Yeah. And when we moved into the condo a couple of years ago, it's a high-rise condo, so it was all like metal studs, and the Wi-Fi in the house was just not working. And luckily,
metal studs are terrible.
Oh my God, it was so bad. So luckily, the random placement, it just worked out this way. The Wi-Fi router, I actually secured it up higher on the wall, so it was probably about a little over my head. And where it was in our master bedroom was kind of like the way this place was a huge box, and you had the living room one side, the bedroom, and then kind of a hallway behind the bedroom and a bathroom next to that. But you could go all the way around the whole unit. Through the bathroom had 2 doors, so you could kind of just do a loop around the unit. And because of where the Wi-Fi was kind of right in the middle of this huge square, which was perfect. And then when we moved into this townhouse, there was no good place to put it to get it in the middle. There just wasn't, like with the access points coming in. So, we had it basically on a 2-floor townhouse. We had it on the top and on the end because that's where the signal was coming in. So I bought Eero, one of the ones that you mentioned, and it came with 2 access points, but actually the base unit is also an access point. So we've got one in the room, in the spare bedroom where the unit is, then one downstairs in the living room, because we had no access in the kitchen whatsoever, which is also downstairs. And the living room one is kind of in the middle of that floor, and then one down in the master bedroom. So we cover that end as well. And now we have, like you said, a perfect 115 down, I think 15 or 20 up in the entire house. And it's amazing because we got garbage cell service there, and that helps our phones too, because if you have an iPhone, and I know Android phones probably do this too, you can boost your cell signal by using Wi-Fi. And otherwise we wouldn't be able to use our phones at all on the AT&T network there. It just dies, and we're in the middle of town. It's weird. So anyway, yeah, I can't recommend it more because nobody can put their Wi-Fi router where it needs to be. So buy these little extenders because they're nice and they're stylish too. The Eero ones are really neat looking. They just like blend into the wall.
Designed to be reasonably attractive. You can have it on a shelf, and it's not some blistery, warty looking angular box with 2 big antennas sticking off the top.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the old one we had was I want to say it was a TP-Link router, and I think it had 4 antennas on it, and they all just came off. This thing was enormous, and it was like, my God, my wife hated having it on the wall of our bedroom. I was like, listen, do you want to be able to, surf Facebook anywhere in the house? Because let's be honest, that's what she's doing. Or do you want to have, no internet service at all? So anyway, in the last 2 minutes here, I just want to bring up, by the time you hear this, I'll already have it, and I'll be crafting my review.
And I'll be envious.
But I'm actually selling my DJI Inspire Pro 1 because I just don't have the applications for it anymore, and I know somebody else can use that. And in anticipation of that actually selling, I'm buying the I purchased today, actually, November 5th, the Mavic Mini, the DJI Mavic Mini. Now, this just came out. You can't even buy it yet. It's on pre-order, and I bought it through Best Buy because pre-order makes it live on Monday, the 11th, which means it's going to ship to me on the 11th, which is pretty cool. So just like pre-ordering a book or something like that, you actually get it on the day that it's supposed to be out. And it's $399, and I actually paid the $499 price for the full package. I think it comes with an extra battery or something, plus a case and all that stuff. But basically, it's called the Mavic Mini because it's based on the DJI Mavic line. It's the same exact shape. It's just smaller. It weighs about as much as your smartphone. It's about the size of your smartphone, folded up. And in fact, the image they had it next to is the iPhone 11 Pro, which is the bigger one. But either way, it's about that size. And this is the kind of thing you can throw in your field bag. You can throw in your pocket, for Christ's sake. You can throw it in your field vest, and it's got a little remote that you hook your phone into for the display, and it's got a 4-kilometer range. This little tiny thing has a 4-kilometer range, a nice camera that swivels up and down so it doesn't go left and right, but you could just move the drone for that. And it's just, I'm really excited to see what this thing can do. And some of the pre-built DJI maneuvers too are getting better and better and better for doing different things. So yeah, I'm looking forward to using this because I can use it in a lot more applications. I mean, when I go fly somewhere or whatever, I mean, I've got this DJI Inspire Pro, which is an amazing aerial platform, but my God, is it enormous. Like I can't take it anywhere. It's heavy. The box is huge, and it's just like, very particular applications that I'm just simply not doing anymore are what that's designed for. And I hope I can find a good home for it. Somebody that can actually use that level of drone. Of course, one of the things I'm definitely going to test is how stable is this thing in the wind, because it has GPS stabilization. Oh, and it's supposed to have a 30-minute battery life as well.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Yeah. Now, with that 30-minute battery life, you're probably taking a lot of it down if you're in a windier condition, because with GPS stabilization, it's going to be really fighting a heavy wind, because aerodynamically, the lighter it is, the less resistant to wind it's going to be. So the wind is really going to be pushing it around, and I'm interested to see how stable the camera is and how stable the platform is in a moderate wind condition, which is pretty much every single day after 11 o'clock here in Nevada. So, yeah, we'll see. I'm excited to test it out. And I think the first time I fly or the second time at least, will probably be off the back of my boat in the Sacramento River, which means I'll probably lose it in the water. So might only get one review out of it, but we'll see.
The algorithm has been doing a great job about trying to get me to buy one of these, because it shows up on my news feed all the time, and I've clicked on a bunch of links on it. And there are a couple things. I mean, you mentioned the 30-minute, and the pre-reviewers are all confirming that it does get incredibly long battery life. Big reason why it does it is because it's so small. It weighs so little that you don't actually have to register with the FAA.
Okay, so I've heard things about that before. You're right. Drones of a certain size do have to be registered, but the other thing that triggers registration is commercial use. Yeah. If you're using a Part 107, no, if you're using it for commercial use, if you're using this on archaeological projects, legally, you still have to register it.
Right.
Okay. And you're still going to have a Part 107. It doesn't matter how big the drone is. It can be the size of your thumbnail. You're going to have to register that if you're using it for commercial use. That's just a fact of the FAA. It doesn't matter what you're doing.
Yep, that's what I wanted to get to. So, then the other thing, though, briefly about the wind. I saw a video yesterday of a guy flying his demo unit out over the Hudson River last week when we had 20, 25 mile an hour gusts. And he has he's a drone reviewer, so he had one camera on the ground pointed up at the drone, and the other view was the view from the drone's camera. And the wind is buffeting that drone around. It's putting all its energy into staying in one place. Yeah. And that video is rock solid off the drone. Rock solid. It was really amazing.
That's what I'm looking forward to, because I totally trust DJI's ability to create a stable platform, because they've demonstrated it time and time again, and it just gets better and better and better. And so I don't think wind is going to be a problem. I mean, that confirms it right there. So, and I was kind of thinking that because I knew the camera would have really great stabilization, and sure, you're going to reduce your battery life, but still, if I'm reducing it from 30 minutes, not 15, I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
So, yeah. All right.
Cool.
Well, that's it for yeah, me too. So that's it for this week's episode. Check out all the links on the show notes to the things that we talked about, and send us in your Microsoft Word horror stories about track changes so we can so Paul can read those as he goes to sleep at night.
I don't know. I don't want to be too scared before I go to sleep. I'll have nightmares.
I know. So send us in anything you want. We're constantly looking for new guests and topics to talk about. So if you're doing anything in the archaeological space, chances are you're using technology of one way or another, even if it is just Microsoft Word. Talk to us, and we will have a nice little chat about it. So, all right. Thanks, everybody, for listening. And thank you, Paul, for the great topic.
Thanks, Chris. Take care. Thanks for listening to the ArchaeoTech Podcast. Links to items mentioned on the show are in the show notes at www.archpodnet.com/archaeotech. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com and paul@lugal.com. Support the show by becoming a member at archpodnet.com/members. The music is a song called Off Road and is license free from Apple. Thanks for listening.
This show is produced and recorded by the Archaeology Podcast Network, Chris Webster and Tristan Boyle, in Reno, Nevada, at the Reno Collective.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.
Thanks again for listening to this episode and for supporting the Archaeology Podcast Network. If you want these shows to keep going, consider becoming a member for just $7.99 US a month. That's cheaper than a venti quad eggnog latte. Go to arcpodnet.com/members for more info.